well, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is the pre-request for response webinar for the FY26 MVP Action Grant Round. My name is Marissa Robertson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Director of the MVP program. So our agenda for today is we are going to give an overview of the MVP program. We will provide details on the upcoming FY26 Action Grant Round. The regional coordinators will go over some project case studies with you all of successful example projects. And then we will have time for Q&A at the end on action grants. Two other things to note is that we are recording this session and that if you have questions, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. In that you don't have to wait till the end of the webinar to send your question. You can send it over at any time, and we will collect them and address them all at the end. Please also note that the updates that we are providing today on the RFR are pending approval, but this is what we are expecting, but to please reference the final posted RFR for the final say. So here is a breakdown of the MVP regions across the state. The MVP program is a state and local partnership to build resilience to climate change by building capacity to respond to climate effects at the local level and pilot innovative adaptation practices. The state is divided into 6 regions, and each region is assigned a regional coordinator. To date, we've had 99% participation across the state, so that's 349 municipalities out of 351. And last action grant round FY25 was the most funding that we have awarded to date, which was around 52.4 million for 71 projects. The MVP program was created in 2017 to improve community resilience to climate change. And MVP defines climate resilience as the ability of a community to address the needs of its built, social, and natural environment to anticipate, cope with, and rebound stronger from events and trends related to climate change hazards. Resilient communities don't just recover, they continuously build capacity to reduce the impacts of future climate events. The key here is the continuously building capacity piece. We are looking for projects that are proactive and not so much reactive. So here you'll see the MVP program has 10 core principles. These principles are stated and linked throughout the RFR. They're also up on our website in various spots. And we highly recommend referencing these 10 core principles as you're writing your application. These are components we look for in successful projects when we are reviewing grant applications. And if you are unsure about your project idea and whether it is the right fit for the MVP program, it's always a good idea to look at these principles and see, is this project meeting most or all of these core principles? Here are some statistics from last round, FY25. We received 136 applications, $108 million was requested. We funded 71 projects for a total funding of 52.3 million, and the average grant size was around $738,000. And for this upcoming FY26 round, we received 136 expressions of interest or EOIs. So the FY26 round details and timeline. This year we are expecting around 25 million to be available for award, but that is subject to change. The max amount that can be requested for an individual project is $3 million. And the max amount for a regional project is $5 million. There is a 10% match required with exceptions, which I will get into in a little bit. And the program is reimbursement based, and that also comes with some exceptions, which I will cover later in the presentation. The applications are submitted through the same system we have used in the past, FormStack. We do want to call out that next year we will be using a new grants management system that EEA is building and rolling out. So expect some changes for next round, but for this round we will be using the same system, which is FormStack. And then our timeline is slightly moved up this year. So the RFR is expected to be released in late February of 2025. The Q&A period will last around 2 weeks, and the applications will be due in early April. We are expecting award announcements around June, and then anticipated project start date of September. And then your project can either be 1 year ending in June 30th, 2026, or 2 years, June 30th, 2027. So this is the exciting part. I know we're all waiting for what's new in this FY26 round. So the first thing that is new this year is the rural and small town set aside. This is something we have heard feedback on in various forms over the past several years. So this FY26 action grant round will include a set aside of approximately 30% of this round's funding for communities with rural and small town designation. Please check, there is a list from the Office of Rural Affairs. Please check this list to see if your community has received designation from the office. And for the set aside, there will be no match requirement for these communities, and these communities may also request to be considered to receive a portion of the grant funding upfront based on demonstrated need. And those questions around demonstrated need are in attachment K. We worked again this year to try to simplify the application. So length and repetition and questions were reduced. The climate science and data section is now called climate change impacts and data. This connects directly to the Massachusetts climate assessment and also provides updated guidance on when the climate resilience design standards tool is required. Environmental justice populations and priority populations section has been simplified. For this section, we are really looking for projects that are in, by, and for environmental justice and priority populations, and for projects that continue to involve these populations throughout the project in meaningful ways. Public involvement and community capacity is now community engagement and capacity building. And this section just consists of 2 questions that directly align with the MVP 2.0 process. The section measurements of success has been removed, and this year you will now identify metrics to be tracked for the project during your project's kickoff meeting with your regional coordinator. So identifying those metrics is no longer part of the application process. Something else we want to call out this year is that the Office of Climate Science is available to provide technical assistance for the Climate Resilience Design Standards tool while the application is open. This means, so technical assistance means that they can help with physically logging into and running the tool. They can't help with input or analysis while the application is open, but we do want to make sure that you know if you are having trouble making an account logging in, that they can help with those technical aspects. We received some feedback in the past about the RFR's accessibility. So this year we updated the font type, size, and formatting to comply with best practices. And we will continue to take compliance with the MBTA Communities Act into account when making grant award recommendations. And again, please review the RFR for the final say on all of these updates, but this is what we're expecting. So the MVP Action Grant has 3 buckets of eligible applicants. The first is municipalities who have received MVP community designation, either by completing an MVP 1.0 plan through the original MVP planning grant process, or through designation for prior work. And please note that communities with MVP plans dated in May 2018 or or earlier must also have applied to the MVP Planning 2.0 grant in 2023 or 2024 to be eligible for the FY26 Action Grant. The Commonwealth's political subdivisions, including cities, towns, counties, and districts, RPAs are all eligible, and then also tribal governments. The MVP Action Grant has three project types. Type 1 is planning, assessment, capacity building, and regulatory updates. Type 2 is design and permitting. And Type 3 is construction and on-the-ground implementation. Please note that for Type 3 construction projects, you will need to demonstrate that you have all necessary permits and permits. And when you are applying, you will be asked to identify what project type your project falls under, so Type 1, 2, or 3. The action grant has some required application components and then some additional optional attachments based on the project type. So the required components are the completed online form, which you will be completing in FormStack, the completed written application portion, which is referenced as attachment A in the RFR, and the completed scope and budget template, which is called attachment B. There are some additional attachments. So if you are doing a implementation or construction project, there's attachment C that goes over some permitting questions. You may need to provide a statement of match, letters of commitment from landowners, if applicable, partners in municipalities. If you're doing a regional project, you may be required to run and upload the output from the Climate Resilience Design Standards tool. And this is for projects that focus on a specific site with physical assets at any stage. So this might be like a new building, new infrastructure, or redevelopment, or major maintenance of an existing structure. If you qualify for the rural and small town set aside, you'll be asked to fill out attachment K. And then for land acquisition projects, you must also provide the draft town meeting or city council vote language and an appraisal. So there is space in the FormStack form to upload these attachments. Please note that as you are going through and filling out the actual form in FormStack that you can save your progress, but you cannot save uploaded attachments. So you will need to upload those attachments right before you do your final submission. And also just wanted to call out the form looks a little different this year. They've applied the mass.gov website style to it, but it is the same form that we've used in the past. So attachment B, which is the scope and budget spreadsheet, is one of the most important aspects of the application. We really look at attachment B to see if the tasks that are being proposed throughout the narrative are showing up in the budget. This is a good indicator for us of whether these tasks are actually going to be done during the project. So there's a few different areas to fill out information in the attachment B. Column A here, you'll see project task. This is where you give the project task and subtask number, project task and subtask name and number. So you'll see here subtask 1.1 and then the name. Column B is a description of the task or scope. So this is where you'll give a brief, clear description of the explanation of work that will be performed. Previously, this was done in narrative form, and starting last round, we started having this description incorporated directly into the attachment B. Column C is where you are going to identify your deliverables. And these are items that will be submitted to MVP to indicate task completion. Columns D and E are your task or subtask start and end dates. And then columns F through H are where you will identify your total grant ask and then whether you have cash or in-kind match, depending on if you have 10% match or not. Please also note you don't need to submit some supplemental information for the attachment B, such as a Gantt chart or a project timeline. All of that information should be captured in the various columns in attachment B. And the other thing we want to call out is that attachment B is no longer requiring you to identify the percentage of funds going to EJ or priority populations the way that it did last year. Attachment B also has some instructions and tips within the spreadsheet to help you while you're filling it out. So you see these tabs at the bottom here are designed to guide you through crafting your budget. There are also notes within the Excel sheet about max funding amounts for project reporting, project management, etc. And we also add a checklist to Combise as a separate file that you can use as you're filling out your attachment B to make sure that it's filled out completely. So as part of your project, you may be required to submit the output report from the Climate Resilience Design Standards tool. This tool provides design criteria for proposed climate adaptation projects at the state and local level that include the design of a physical asset. So this might be new or redeveloped buildings, parking lots, coastal engineering structures, roads, etc. It'll ask you to enter the project location and project specific information, answer some questions to determine the risk levels based on climate parameters like heat, precipitation, and flooding. And then the tool will give your project a score for criticality and exposure to climate hazards. The tool provides recommendations for design criteria that includes things like the planning horizon, the return period, and standards for the design. With the MVP application, you'll submit a printout of the tool output, and you'll also answer questions about how these outputs are integrated into the design of your project. And as mentioned earlier, you may reach out to the Office of Climate Science if you need help with physically running the tool. So attachment K, this is new this year, the rural and small town set aside. So MVP recently did an analysis of towns and communities that have gone through the MVP 1.0 planning process and received designation, but have never applied for an action grant. And many of these communities overlap with towns who have been designated as rural or small towns by the Office of Rural Affairs. So this year we are setting aside around 30% of this round's funding for these designated rural and small towns with hopes of getting these communities more involved in the program. And for reference, a small town is considered a population under 7,000, and a rural town has a population density of under 500 persons per square mile. And as mentioned earlier, this set aside is really direct response to feedback the program has received over the past several years around making climate resilience more accessible for small and rural towns. Projects awarded through the set aside will also include no match, and there is the potential for partial upfront funding based on community demonstrated need and EEA approval. Now we will get into the competitive evaluation criteria for the individual application sections. And again, the RFR is being reviewed, so please look at that document for the final say, but this is what we are expecting. So the first section is the project goals and impacts section. This is where you'll really give a broad overview of your project. It asks about your projects it asks for you to give a brief project overview and top goals, and also it asks to clearly relate your project to previous identified community resilience priorities, ideally identified through the MVP 1.0 planning grant process. The next section is the climate change impacts and data section. This section directly connects to the Massachusetts Climate Change Assessment. If applicable, it might require the use of the Climate Resilience Design Standards tool, and it asks about how you will be incorporating the latest climate change data, projections, and expertise into your project. And something we want to call out is that's new this year is that use of the term expertise. So this year in this section, we're also giving you the opportunity to tell us about what experts you might be bringing on board to work with to help you integrate climate change data and projections into the design of your project. The scope, budget, and timeline is the attachment B that I went over slightly earlier in the presentation. This is where you will identify your grant asks, your match. You will detail the tasks, description, and deliverables in this template. When you identify your project budget, you will be asked to delineate it by fiscal year, with clear phases for your project in each fiscal year. So if it's a 1 year project, that is kind of self-explanatory. You don't need to delineate the phases, but if you are applying for a 2 year project, it needs to be two distinct project phases clearly laid out in attachment B. The project timeline is identified in attachment B, and this section is also where you will identify regulatory components for your project, including the attachment C, which goes over permitting questions if required for construction projects. The nature-based solution section is a core component of the MVP program. This is where you'll tell us how your project incorporates ecological systems and solutions into your project and how these concepts are really centered in the design of your project. And it will also give you the opportunity to describe environmental co-benefits that might come from your project. The environmental justice and priority population section is where you will tell us how your project is by, for, and with EJ and priority populations. So is the project located within an EJ area? Was that identified and developed in partnership with EJ or priority populations? Does the project continue to involve these populations in meaningful ways? And will the project increase resilience for these populations? Community engagement and capacity building. This is where you identify your engagement activities that are going to occur throughout your project. Ideally, these activities should be identified also in attachment B, with funding going towards these engagement activities. And you will also tell us in this section about how the project builds community capacity for ongoing climate resilience. And in this instance, these community capacity tasks could also be incorporated into your attachment B to really integrate them as a core component of the project with funding going towards these tasks. The project partnerships section is new. This year we had provided a definition of what MVP considers a project partnership. So in this case, a partnership is an organization that is not directly related to the lead applicant. So this might be community-based organization, community liaisons, but we're not really looking for like a municipal department or somebody internal that you're going to partner with. We want to know what other aspects of the community you're going to bring into the project. These project partners should be identified in your budget in attachment B, and you will also be required to provide a detailed letter of commitment from each project partner that you've identified. The regional impact section, this is where you will tell us how the project provides benefit beyond the immediate geographic area of the project location. So this could be neighboring communities, neighboring towns, how it might benefit those as well, even though it's not directly located in their communities. The maintenance section is where you will tell us how you plan to maintain your project if it's an implementation project, how you will plan to physically maintain it, or if it's more of a capacity community building project, how you will maintain momentum past the end of the project period. And then transferability is where you will describe how the learnings from your project will be shared with other communities. And we're hoping that this year these activities will ideally be identified also in your budget. So going beyond just posting um, your case study or your webinar on the website, maybe you host an educational opportunity with neighboring towns where you all come together and give a training, really seeing more concrete tasks for that transferability section. And then at the end of the application, there are 16 points that are completed internally by MVP. So this is the equalized valuation per capita, which is how we assess need per town. Um, we give a score for good standing in the MVP program, and then also overall project quality. Here you'll see some project types that are either not eligible or not competitive for MVP Action Grant funding. Again, we're looking for proactive adaptation projects that are nature-based, respond to climate projections, and have strong outreach components. And on the side, you'll see we kind of grouped the non-competitive project types into two categories. On the left, you'll see, excuse me, the left side is our projects that are not aligned really with our core principles and are also just not best resilience practice in general. So this includes fossil fuel generators, tree removal, projects that don't incorporate climate change projections, projects that only repair to previous conditions, or building construction that relies on non-renewable sources of energy. And then on the right side of the slide, you'll see this category is more projects that are non-competitive because they are probably a better fit for a different funding source. So this might include assessment or design of solar, climate action plans, and that one is considered non-competitive now because MVP 2.0 funds a very similar kind of process. Studies that are not linked to implementation, and then FEMA hazard mitigation plan. And with that, some of the regional coordinators are going to give you an overview of some successful projects from their regions.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emma Sass. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hilltowns. And the first project we wanted to talk about this morning is from the city of Pittsfield, was funded in fiscal year 24 and is ongoing into this year. And this project came from concerns that residents of an environmental justice neighborhood brought that their neighborhood has been really impacted by redlining and urban renewal. Basically, a highway separates their neighborhood from the grocery store and other amenities, and there's a really sketchy stairwell and other challenges and safety concerns, as well as flooding and freezing in the winter and other challenges that are getting worse and are projected to get worse and increase the vulnerability of this community. And so this project aims to reconnect this neighborhood to the grocery store and other amenities, but they're doing it in partnership with a lot of different organizations and doing a lot of outreach to make sure that the designs that they're putting forward and moving forward with really reflect the needs of the residents. So this is, I think, a good example of it's in an environmental justice community, and it's was advocated for by this community, and that there's continued involvement. And there you can see on the top, this is a picture of the current staircase, and the bottom is a conceptual design of what it could look like. Also bringing in, a potential gathering space, really bringing the community together around this as a resource. Next slide. This is another project we wanted to highlight. It's from Conway in fiscal year 24, and this is to address flooding concerns through the town, and they had a couple different prongs here. They gathered data and modeled flooding into the future and modeled potential strategies. What would some nature-based options look like? Things like reconnecting a floodplain, getting the bridge out of the way of the river, And they created conceptual design so that they can move forward kind of from this, planning and assessment into a design in the future. And they did a lot of engagement as well. And so trying to get community feedback, both the education and input and bringing people together around these topics to address a really critical issue in the community. Next slide.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I had to find my mute button here. So this is Athol. And this is a great project because if you're looking at the map, you'll see the little white circle, and that is their heat island in Athol. And so back in originally in MVP 1.0, they recognized like they have this really hot part of their town, and they started to think about different solutions that could be implemented to make it less hot. And somebody had the idea of daylighting a stream that runs through a 5 acre parking lot. And the 5 acre parking lot used to be a pond, and it's been this sort of like unused, underutilized portion of the city for a long time, the town for a long time. And started with a crazy idea, planning, design, permitting, and now construction. So most likely next summer, people will be able to visit Athol and see an urban stream being daylighted. So this really is just a good project that demonstrates there's a lot of co-benefits to be had in natural resource restoration in urban environments. Next slide. And here we have Northampton's downtown affordable housing project, which is a really good project because it shows that you can address the climate crisis and the affordable housing crisis simultaneously. Northampton has a parcel of land behind City Hall. They surplused it, gave it to affordable housing developer, nonprofit, and it's being designed to meet the passive house standard, which is, as everybody knows, it's the most efficient, tightest envelope you can have on a house. And they've also used trauma-informed design to make sure people are transitioning from unsafe, unstable housing into this housing are able to feel like it's home for them. So it really just shows a lot of really positive ways of dealing with our climate and housing crisis together. Next slide.
Hello, I'm Michelle. I'm Northeast Regional Coordinator. Welcome to the Northeast Region. This first project is in Reading. This was the result of the Resilient Mystic Collaborative's regional efforts to increase flood resilience across the watershed through a community-led process. This is a treatment train stormwater approach. And it has already shown itself to be effective. It was finished last year. So it stores and treats stormwater runoff from the area roadways and other developed spaces before it reaches the Aberjona River. This design, of course, incorporated rainfall projections to ensure the effectiveness well into the future. The property was transformed from an unimproved empty lot with a lot of invasives and a trail that was not exactly accessible or safe into a safe and welcoming open space with educational signage, native plants, increased tree cover, and of course, this innovative constructed wetland system. The funding was provided by MVP, other state grants, and federal appropriation. Next slide. And this project is from Lowell. So as a result of previous MVP funded projects looking at heat and flood hazards affecting the city, there was a need for increased tree canopy identified. So using existing data, citizen science volunteers, and sustainability students from UMass Lowell, the project team overlaid heat data, tree canopy data, and EJ areas to develop a comprehensive tree plan that the city can use to expand and maintain the public tree canopy. The intention was to equitably provide relief from hazards experienced from extreme heat. Next slide.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Hillary King. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Central Regional Coordinator for the program. This project in Bolton and Clinton was a 2-year project where the community came together to talk about land stewardship in the face of climate change. So municipal staff, ecologists, planners, residents and various landowners visited different sites and had a lot of conversations about forests, wetlands, yards, and parks. The result was one, a guide to caring for trees and thinking about forest resilience, creating lawn and landscape pocket guides for homeowners, municipal staff, and also landscape professionals. And there were also suggested changes to local wetland and development bylaws and regulations for climate resilience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Rocha, she, her, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator for the MVP program. This project takes place in Mashpee, and it aims to increase resilience to harmful algal blooms and Santuit Pond. And this project was predominantly design and permitting for green stormwater infrastructure and other water quality improvements. They paired this with a lot of education. Certain consultants attended the Honor the Earth Fair in Mashpee, where they demonstrated how runoff affects water quality. And this project was design and permitting, but we are currently funding them for the construction of green stormwater and water quality improvements up to $1.6 million this round, I believe. So it really shows how we like to fund projects that can go through all different phases. And this site has a high cultural and historical significance to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. So there was a lot of partnerships between the town and the tribe to do education and art installations and a lot of engagement. So it's a really great partnership and a really great project I like to highlight. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Murad. I'm representing the Greater Boston region. I'm gonna talk about this example project in Everett that was funded in FY23 and 24. So this project was focusing on extreme heat, and they did a lot of engagement through surveys and community events to gather input and to identify specific hot spots in the community where extreme heat was particularly challenging for people. So they also gathered input on what kind of solutions people would prefer to see to help stay cool in these hot spots. And then they were able to use grant funds to install and to purchase some misters and some water fountains in those areas. So it's a good example of a project that was able to implement solutions that were directly identified by community members.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And if you are interested in seeing more MVP Action Grant project examples, you can visit the EEA Climate Grant Viewer. This not only has information on the MVP program and MVP projects, but it also has information on other grant programs. And this is accessible through the Resilient Mass website and the MVP homepage on there. Our GIS specialist, Sula, just made a bunch of updates to this tool, so definitely check it out if you haven't seen it before or haven't looked at it in a while. And then we just wanted to provide some overall program updates for you before we get into the Q&A section of the webinar. So the first thing we want to highlight is that the MVP Winter Webinar Series for 2025 is coming up. The first webinar is on February 26th. And it will cover the community liaison model, give an overview and lessons learned, and some communities who have implemented this model will come to speak and present on this. And then webinar number 2 is on March 6th, and this is a Flooding Studies 101 webinar for those of you who might be interested to learn more about flood modeling. The next initiative we want to highlight is the Climate Resilience Playbook. So this is getting developed in partnership with 2 regional planning associations, MAPC and PVPC. It will result in an online interactive tool that you can use to identify and scope out resilience actions for your communities. So we'll have a lot of great resources, examples, be able to search for project ideas, and that is expected to be released this upcoming spring. And then finally, some updates on the MVP 2.0 planning grant process. We are getting ready to hopefully announce the next round of awarded communities very soon. This upcoming round has some significant updates from the pilot process, and these updates were based directly on feedback that we heard from the pilot communities. So this includes incorporating equity partners into the process to help with items like community liaison recruitment, inclusive engagement, equity issues. We also have updated the guides for equitable and actionable resilience, which is the gear tool. We got a lot of feedback on the gear tool, and we tried to incorporate as much of it as we realistically could. So if you haven't seen that tool before or haven't looked at it in a while, I'll definitely suggest also visiting that as well. It's a great resource to use not only through the 2.0 process, but also for your action grant application. And then we have a whole bunch of new 2.0 materials that have been updated and added to the MVP 2.0 website as well. So now we can get into the Q&A section of the webinar. I made sure to leave enough time for that. And also just want to note that the webinar recording and the slides will also be posted on the MVP website probably within the next day or so for you to all go back and reference.
Okay, hi. I'll be your MC for the Q&A portion. First off, everybody, thanks for putting your questions in the Q&A box. It's been really fun to see those come in. So let's go through, we'll start with grant applications as a category. Okay, so this specific one, and this is from Johanna, it says, do you prefer that attachment A includes some description of the scope tasks in addition to the attachment B task descriptions? So attachment A is like the application itself for folks in the audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the main task for attachment A is to answer the questions in the attachment A and address how the project meets the RFR criteria. The specific descriptions of the tasks in the task list will go in attachment B. And if there's anything you get from the that you take away from the answer to this question is that it you will be the most successful if you follow the directions of the application. We really try to set it up so that you can just go clearly through and provide the information that we're asking for in each section. So no need to provide additional lists that aren't asked for. You can just identify the tasks in attachment B and answer the questions in attachment A.
All right, next question. So what is the effect on a regional application if one of several partner towns happens to be out of compliance with the MBTA Communities Act?
That is a great question. We are still waiting for guidance on how exactly the MBTA communities program will be enforced through the MVP program. You can go ahead and apply, but the community out of compliance might not be able to be included in the award or the project depending on this updated guidance that we should be getting very soon.
Okay. Next question would be, how are tribes going to be considered under the priorities for this round? And the way I interpret it, I think this is in relation to the small towns corvette.
Yes, so tribal governments are definitely eligible and encouraged to apply for MVP action grants. They are also encouraged to municipalities are also encouraged to reach out to local tribes to bring them in as partners. And also just want to call out, there is no match required for tribal government applications. So if you are a tribal government applying for an MVP action grant, your match requirement is waived.
Great, thanks. So here's a specific question. So what are the exceptions that are referenced for tree removal?
Yes, good question. This is new this year. So the exception for tree removal is if you are implementing an approved forest stewardship climate plan or equivalent.
All right, there we go. Okay, so do communities need to have completed the MVP 2.0 process to apply for an action grant, or can they undertake both simultaneously?
Yes. For communities who originally completed their 1.0 plans in 2018 or earlier, the 2.0 process is required in order to continue applying for action grants. So you should have been contacted earlier or I guess it would have been last year, that you are required to apply for the 2.0 process. And the two grants may be done concurrently, so at the same time.
Just a
Great.
small edit to that. You should have been contacted, as Marissa said, but those that were contacted were actually those that were completed in May 2018 or earlier. So if yours was later in 2018, you might be required to do it in the next round and not this round. So if you have any confusion about whether you were supposed to have applied for 2.0 and whether you're eligible for action grants, just reach out to us and we can clarify.
Yes, sorry, I forgot the May is the
No
important
problem.
cutoff there.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like there's a specific question about MBTA, and I think they're basically just want to know is if a talent's out of compliance, can they still be part of a project as long as the lead applicant is compliant? And I think that goes back to the original answer. That's my
Yes,
hunch.
I think we're still awaiting the updated guidance on exactly how the MBTA communities will be implemented through the MVP program.
Right. So we're going to move on. Looks like there's some activity in an area somewhere for this to get cleaned up. So we're going to go to project type. Have clean energy and energy efficiency projects received funding in the past?
Yes, great question. So we have funded several energy resilience projects in the recent past. But the framing when you apply for these kinds of projects is really important, and there must be a really strong, compelling resilience connection there. Many energy and efficiency projects, they're usually a better fit for programs such as the Green Community Programs at DOER. Not to say don't apply if that is your project idea, but you will definitely have to frame it in a way that connects it to both climate resilience and the MVP core principles as well.
Yeah, I think for those, if it's something that is straight up greenhouse gas emissions reduction, I think that's going to be squarely within the DOER wheelhouse, where we're looking at what Marissa said, the resilient adaptation. We'll go back up to the questions. I'm too excited. All right. What do we got here? Some coastal resilience projects have no option other than including some green infrastructure, especially in urban areas. But MVP rightfully prioritizes projects that integrate nature-based solutions. How will you view projects that may require gray infrastructure but seek to integrate nature-based solutions as an approach?
Yes, that's a great question and something that we often are discussing internally. So projects that prioritize nature-based solutions, really as like a central inherent component of the project will score better in the nature-based section of the application. That in between of gray hard infrastructure can be funded, but it will require that the other components of the application are really strong, and also that the nature-based section of it, that there is a nature-based connection still, and that basically you made the best effort that you could to make it as nature-based as possible, and that there are still co-benefits being provided through the project, and things like that.
All right. So to follow up on nature-based solutions, so how are we reconciling the permitting challenges for nature-based solutions? And it looks like we're still working to answer that one. But I think like to buy people time, my take is that we're still going to defer to DEP. Like I think we're not going to try to get in front of DEP. I could be wrong on that, but maybe someone else can answer that.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is that even if it is a nature-based project that's inherently very nature-based, the project still needs to comply with local, state, and federal laws and permitting to be competitive, and that we really defer to our regulatory agencies for permitting questions.
Okay, so we have a question about match. So, all right, and on the topic of match, so say for example, a university is providing some in-kind support. Does that count as a match? Like if it's a state university?
Yes, in-kind university staff hours are fine to include as match.
Okay, I like these easy questions. Those are good. Okay, so project type question. So could funding be used for either design and permitting, construction, or renovation for buildings that are not owned by the municipality, but instead by a community partner? And I see an answer is being worked on there. And I know it's like we're allowed to do that as long as the municipality or the applicant contracts with whoever owns the property. That's
Right. So the property owner needs to be on board with the project, commit to the maintenance of it, and you should demonstrate support in some way, whether that's like a letter of commitment, a letter of support from the community partner saying like, yes, they are in agreement with this project.
hmm. We have another question. So this one's near and dear to my heart. So is paving eligible as part of a project?
So generally, this is a case by case maybe, but the other parts of the project would really need to align with the core principles. And we suggest that if this is part of your project idea, that you reach out to your regional coordinator to get feedback on this.
Okay. All right. So now we're moving in some general questions. So here's one that's probably in a lot of people's minds. Is any of the MVP grant funding dependent upon federal funding, which may or not be in quite, so yeah, and are we dependent upon federal funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer to that is no. All of our funding is state level funding. So we are not impacted by any of the federal funding things happening right now.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in our box. Am I missing anything? Let me just jump over there to the other Q&As.
Looks like
Oh,
there
looks like
might
there's
be
some
two. Let's
specific
see.
ones. One is there less MVP funding for FY26 and FY25? Well,
Yes. We were asked this yesterday. Kara, do you want to give
Sure,
your
yeah.
explanation of that?
Yeah. So we anticipate that we will be awarding less than we did last year, but it's just because we had a few different funding streams that were added to our usual capital planning budget for the MVP line item last year. So that's why we were able to award that 52 million. But in general, our MVP budget is usually around 25 million.
okay. So I see a really specific question about a project with two parking lots. Um, and I think that one, I might want to recommend reaching out to your RC on that one. Um,
Yeah, I think that in general, if you have a really project specific question, reaching out to your regional coordinator is your best bet to get feedback on this on a specific idea.
okay, and then final one, we have what does the MVP team what's our view on an application for a regional climate action planning effort? Basically, so we're looking at regional climate action planning efforts. And would
Yes.
MVP be a funding source to finish this project if they need to finish a project that's been funded through another source?
Yes, this is an instance. I see the question. It looks like there's some like really specific scenario going on. I would recommend reaching out to your regional coordinator on this one as well to talk through the details of this.
Yeah, I would just add in general, though we are not going to be funding climate action planning processes, as Marissa said before, because it heavily aligns with the 2.0 process. So we probably would suggest that you apply for 2.0 if you want to do that kind of effort.
That's all I got from the question and answer box.
Great. Yeah, and if just like I keep plugging, feel free to reach out to your regional coordinator with questions. You can also email. There's a general MVP at mass.gov email if you have questions or you're not sure who your RC is, who to reach out to. And that the slides and the recording will be up on the website within the next few days for reference. So thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you all have a good day. Thanks.